Hi everyone, my name is Flora and welcome to By the Book. It's an interactive webinar brought to you by our co-hosts, cousins Peter, Danny, and John Bookbar. Peter is a CNBC contributor and CIO of Berkeley Advisory Group. John is Vice Chair of Neurosurgery at Lenox Hill Hospital, where he's also an investigator at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research. Danny, John's twin, is president at Thrasio, the largest acquirer of Amazon third-party private label businesses, and has 20 years of experience leading fast-growing consumer businesses for global brands, such as the NFL and Weight Watchers. Johnny, Danny, and Peter are all leaders in their respective fields, and they'll be discussing health, wellness, finance, business, and life with our special guests, Jay Jacobs, Sandy Samberg, and Rick Farman. So without further ado, take it away, Bookvars.
Thank you, Flora. I'm Peter Bookvar, and just a quick disclosure before we begin. John and Dan are not affiliated with Berkeley Advisory Group and Private Advisor Group, and nothing they say should be taken as investment advice, and nothing I say should be taken as medical advice. And I'll kick it back to Danny.
Thanks, Peter. I'm Danny Bookvar, and thank you, Flora, for that introduction. I'm president at Thrasio and former CEO of Circle Line Sightseeing and president of the NFL experience. Before that, I live on the Upper West Side with a wife of 22 years and 2 teenagers and camp goers. So eager to hear about what you have to say today, Jay. Johnny, why don't you do a quick intro and then we'll introduce Jay.
Hi guys, I'm John Bookvar. I'm sitting here on the corner of Lexington and 77th at Lenox Hill Hospital. I'm happy to say, as I say every week, I'll give you a brief rundown. It is quieted down here. It is back to sort of business as usual. I did about 8 brain tumors here today at Lenox Hill Hospital, all COVID negative when they came in and COVID negative when they leave. So really business as usual. I can't emphasize enough how safe the hospitals are, even here in New York City. Probably safer now than it's ever been. I always say the safest time to fly is the day after a tragic plane crash. And frankly, there are no hospitals that are better suited to understand COVID and prevent you from getting COVID than the hospitals here in New York and New York City. So we're just so proud to sort of get back to business as usual. Obviously, we're taking extra precautions with testing and PPE and making sure our patients are safe. But the numbers have really gone down to essentially really small numbers coming through our emergency room. So that's great news for everybody as we look to open up across the state and across the city. It's really a great feeling to be back here on the old front lines of healthcare.
Well, it's a good segue. So today we do want to talk about opening up, and one area that's a super hot topic is summer camps. So we're very happy to have Jay Jacobs with us. Jay, you're the executive director of Timberlake family of camps, 3 sleepaway camps and 3-day camps throughout Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and Long Island. You've served as the president of the New York section of the American Camp Association and founder of SCOPE, which is a program which provides camping experiences for inner city kids through nonprofit camps. And we'd like to talk to you about what I think I've read is an $18 billion camping industry serving over 20,000 children. So welcome and thanks for being here today. We have some questions for you. And I hear there's some late breaking news in the camp front about some popular Northeast camps that have either delayed or closed. Did I hear that one of the Bookvar family's major competitors is Racket Lake Camp, for the camp we grew up? And I think I just saw that they postponed or even decided to close for the entire summer. Did we hear that today, guys?
Yeah, I heard that news.
Racket Lake. So Jay, what's your view on some of these decisions that we're hearing today?
Well, it's a very hard time. Let's face it, as camp directors, we're all responsible for taking care of other people's children, and you don't get a greater responsibility than that. So in this time, each camp has got to make its own determination as to what it believes it can do to keep COVID-19 out of its camp, to keep our children and our staff safe. And those are very personal decisions. In some camps, many really good camps, competitors of ours, but they're all colleagues. I like them all. I think they run fabulous camps. And for their own reasons and their own assessments, they've closed many of them. But we're going to be open. I think we put together an excellent protocol to keep our camps safe, and that's how we're going to go forward.
So can you share? Oh, fire away, Peter.
Sort of 2 questions. What's been the feedback from parents? in expressing interest in sending their kids or not. And what's been the feedback from counselors who are, let's call it teenagers, that will be very limited in the things that they can do as teenagers do?
Well, I mean, the second part, that's always the way it is if you're on staff as a counselor at camp. You know, there are limits. It's not exactly, you know, the wild and crazy college life that some of them, you know, come out of and then they get restricted. Well, it's going to be even more restricted at camp this summer because we're going to have to develop programs, and we're doing just that, to keep them excited and engaged in camp, because we're not going to have those days off out of camp or those nights out on the town. We have to create that protected environment that I talked about. And to the first question that you asked about parents, overwhelmingly, I would say 75% of the parents overwhelmingly want camp, believe in camp, believe we can keep camp safe. They're all go. And I hear from them all the time, and they're just begging us to make sure we're open. I know there are a lot of people crying right now because they just got notified that their camps are closed. So on the one hand, you've got that group. And then of course you've got, I'd say, 10% of the families that they just feel this isn't right time for them. They don't have a comfort level, and they're probably not going to send their children as of now to camp. And the remainder are more wait and see, the other 15% or so, more wait and see likely to come. And the way we look at it, it's not about filling every bed this summer. We want to make, in fact, it's somewhat beneficial if we don't. It's a little easier to operate. And I think, we're more comfortable doing it. So, every parent's got to make their own decision. It's a risk assessment, if you will, for their own children. I can't tell them anything other than what we're doing. And then they have to determine whether that's good enough for them.
Jay, I'm a camp doctor at Baco. This is my 11th summer as a camp doctor. My father was a camp doctor. And, I always hear the lore that, camps were used in the polio epidemic and even measles as a place to de-densify cities. And do you think that's going to help resonate through the government, who ultimately will be giving out permits for you to open the camps, that this is a rational way to de-densify some of these areas and help essentially with this stopping the spread?
Well, let's look at a couple of things that I think that people miss. Right now, there are some people who are framing the question as a choice between opening camp and giving children access to a risk of getting COVID perhaps at the camp and getting ill, or not opening camp and keeping children safe and healthy. That's a false choice. That's not true. Because we know that unless a parent is going to keep their child locked up indoors all summer long alone, which they're not. I mean, a couple of them might, but not most. Then they're going to be going to the beaches, the parks, the playgrounds in suburban areas. They're going to be out with their friends in someone's driveway shooting hoops and being in the backyard pools at the neighbor's house. And, children do not socially distance themselves well. That's not a talent they seem to have. So here you have the choice of going up to camp where everyone is tested before they come. They're tested again when they get there to doubly check to make sure the tests are good and that there's negative negative COVID. And then they play in camp versus being in an area. If there's COVID anywhere, it's going to be more likely to be found in suburban areas in the New York metropolitan area, for instance, or the cities, than it is to be found in the Catskill Mountains, because it's not there right now in any numbers. So I would just say to you that, we have a confidence we can keep children safe up at camp. Are we guaranteeing it? Do we believe absolutely there's no chance? Of course not. And then we have to have protocols as to what to do and the staff to take care of children in case something should slip through our fortress, if you will.
So your rationale is to develop essentially an isolated family that is sheltered in place
exactly
for 5 or 7 weeks, and
exactly.
that there's no penetrance of that. How are you going to do testing? Obviously, even as healthcare providers, we don't always have the easiest of tests, and you may have seen the report today that even the PCR testing through Abbott Labs that the president's office is using has a false negative rate. So I'm always under the assumption that there will be positive kids at camp this summer, and that should not cause us anxiety. Now, there's a whole host of anxiety around this Kawasaki's inflammatory condition, but so how do you justify, or what are your plans for testing?
Well, let me tell you the two types of tests that we're going to be using. Pre-camp, there is a test that is a saliva-based test that takes 2 days to get the results. You do it at home. It's done much like we're doing right now with a medical doctor on the other side of a Zoom kind of a conference to see that the test is done properly. The parent puts it in a pouch. It's FedExed back to the lab. The lab gives a result. The result has to come back negative. They get a receipt, forwarded to the camp, and now that's your passport to get into camp. As soon as they get into camp, we're going to be using an antigen test, a nasal swab, not deep nasal, that's more painful. This one, I believe, uses the Quidel system, not the Abbott Lab test. It's got a high degree of accuracy. None of these tests, and you know it working in hospitals, you know, there's no absolutes, there's no 100%, which is why we're doing the multi-layered approach. We figure 3 things go into the equation. The much lower density or prevalence, I should say, of the virus in the communities by the time camp starts. You'll have very few new cases every day. Right now in Nassau County, well under 200 new cases. It's 1.4 million people here in Nassau County as an example. Secondarily, you do the pre-test, which will have potentially some shortcomings in accuracy, but then you'd have to be that unlucky that in the 3rd test, given right when children get to camp, that also the positive gets through. That's kind of hard, but you know, is it possible? Yeah, we're not saying it's impossible, but really, you know, I think the virus would have to be working to get in under those circumstances.
How many doctors and staff in the infirmary do you need this summer?
Well, we typically have 2 doctors and 6 nurses, and that we consider overstock. We probably need 4 nurses typically, but we like to have more. This year we've stepped it up, adding an additional nurse as a 7th. That gives us really an extra 3 nurses in camp. I do expect enrollment to be about 10 to 15% lower to begin with, and we've added a physician's assistant to the mix to help us even further. Because of the fact we're going to be testing, because of the fact that a child comes in with a cough and maybe a little fever, that's going to mandate a test. We're going to be a little bit more vigilant. On top of which, remember, any visitors that come to camp have to be pre-tested, and then they have to be tested at camp. So, you know, we've got a whole set of protocols that have to be followed. It's going to need more staff. And while we can provide other people that are non-medical to help with some of it, the medical portions really do have to be done by our health center team.
Jay,
and you won't have international staff this year. I don't know what percentage of your staff is international. I assume it's 0.
Now it's about 0. Yeah. I mean, we're still hoping that we have a handful of Canadians. We're still hoping that the Canadian border gets opened, but you know, we're not counting on it. It just would be a benefit.
So Jay, it would seem that sleepaway camp would actually be easier because you're self-quarantining, as Johnny said, like an entire family. How do you manage the day camps where kids are going home at night, they're doing whatever they do on the weekends, and same with the counselors? How do you balance that?
Well, there, I think the offset to that is whereas at sleepaway camp, parents have to have the confidence to send their children away, and they're not, they don't have eyes on them all the time. In day camp, the children come home every night. And so they see their children every night. We're going to tell parents, if your child isn't feeling well, keep them home. We'll prorate your day at the day camp. You get your money back. We don't want your child there. If a child is kept home for symptoms of any sort, we're going to be testing every child in that child's group. We're keeping our group sizes small so that you don't have the chance of it spreading widely. Buses will be a bit emptier where we're not putting a child in every single seat. We'd like the window seats. And if we do have to put children together, they're going to have to wear masks on the bus the same way as the bus driver, who will be tested, will have to wear a mask driving the bus. We're going to keep children out at the pools, outside, out of doors, in sunlight as much as we can. That's where lunch will be served. The least indoors as possible. I worry about rainy days because rainy days are big in day camps for close-in movies and other indoor activities. We're going to be doing much like the schools do, where they give you a certain number of snow days. We're going to tell parents, unfortunately, we've got to have 3 rain days that just, you know, we may call you and say, keep them home. And then we may have other rain days, if it should happen, where we'll reimburse parents for the days missed. So we're going to be doing everything we can to keep the activities outdoors, test children where we think there's a problem. We'll be testing all of our staff before camp starts. And if we think it's necessary, we may be testing the children with the same in-camp testing we're using at the sleepaway camps.
So what happens if the governor decides not to give you a permit to open camp?
Well, it's going to be a much more relaxing summer. I'll be up in the mountains with my new dog and preparing a long time for 2021. It'll be very sad. I'll miss the kids. And I think it's a mistaken opportunity because, frankly, I see camps as being the pilot program that the state should be relying on to see what works and what doesn't work, how well testing is and is effective. What do the small cohorts do to contain virus? All of these things are necessary toward the preparation for opening schools in September and giving parents and teachers confidence that group environments like we're able to run, done the right way, can be safe. Because at some point, folks, we've got to open this world and we've got to give people confidence. We've got to get kids back to real face-to-face education. And I think camp offers a perfect opportunity on a small, almost laboratory basis to provide that kind of pilot program.
Let me echo something that you said also. There's no doubt that the virus spreads less well outside in sunlight. We know the decay of the virus is much, much greater in sunlight. So in discussions, for example, with our camp, as much as you can do out of doors, the better. There should be no social hall activities. Meals may be spread, put meals outside. All activities, shows should be outside. And I agree with you. I think I have quite a level of comfort in opening camp. I think we, as doctors, we can handle the testing and just be prepared. All of our kids have been in quarantine for 3 months. Now they're going to be put together. They're going to get a whole host of other contagions that are going to mimic the coronavirus. So we're going to be busy in the infirmaries, but we have the resources to do it. I think if you don't open camp, why open school in the fall? And this is going to perpetuate through society. So I happen to agree with you. I think we can handle it.
Hey, but that you mentioned the word resources, and Jay, I know you work with inner city kids. They're the ones I'm worried about because they don't have the resources. So are the rich kids better off because they'll get to camp, but the inner city kids are going to have camp canceled?
Yeah, that's the shame of the nation that we live in. And I think that's true. And I will tell you something, when I heard that the city was closing the pools, I thought about that. I think, what a strategic mistake. Because understand something, on those hot, miserable, humid days in the city, loads of city kids, and these are for the most part, those that are underserved to begin with, they're going to be looking for ways to cool off and some, jump in the river. And we see that regularly. Do you know that 332 children a year die in drownings? And it isn't at camp, and it generally isn't at supervised pools. So I just have to say to you that we've got to really watch the decisions we make. And those are the children we need to take care of the most. And I think it's a shame that we are short-sighted and don't look at the overall benefits and long-term benefits of taking care of kids who need it the most. And yes, there is a sense of guilt that I have to some degree that we serve for the most part this population. There are campers in small numbers that we take, on a charitable basis, but it's a drop in the bucket, and it's not even worth talking about it.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty with that. It's a real problem. The Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts, have they issued opinions yet on whether they're opening?
I don't know that they are, frankly. I think there are a lot of not-for-profits not opening. There are a lot of for-profits not opening. It's going to give us access to a lot more staff. I know I'm getting calls already from parents of children whose camps have closed that want to get into ours. And quite frankly, I always love to take the business, but I'm not looking to overpack this year. This is a year I'd rather be light and it's more manageable, I think. And so, it's unfortunate we can't accommodate people, but this is the world we're in right now. I think it's going to be very bumpy. It is, I have to tell you something, looking forward to the summer, and I'm excited to do it. I've told everybody, this is going to be every single day a tough summer, not just in the job we have to do, but, I'll be standing in front of the basketball court in front of, all the campers, and somebody's going to start coughing, and my heart's going to begin racing because you know what I'm going to be thinking. Of course, every summer we have fevers, every summer we have coughs and colds and all the rest of it. But this summer, boy, we're going to be on the watch.
Yeah, usually as parents, we're worried about lice and bed bugs.
Right.
It seems trivial.
That's right.
Peter and John, anything before we wrap up with Jay?
No, that was great.
if you need an advocate when you go to Albany to talk to the governor, I'm with you every step of the way. So
Great. Well, I'll count on that. Thank you.
I'll give Jay Cannell my cell phone for you. So.
Good. Okay.
But thank you again. It's really
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Good luck.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you. Have a good summer.
Thanks, Jed.
Okay.
Terrific. Now we're going to transition to Sandy Samberg. Hi, Sandy. Can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yep, I can hear you. Thanks.
How are you? Do you mind if I do a quick introduction? Sandy is a pediatric nurse practitioner. You're here today as the co-founder and executive director of SOUL RYEDERS, a nonprofit cancer support organization based in Rye, New York. SOUL RYEDERS helps community members affected by all types of cancer, from diagnosis through treatment, recovery, and survivorship. And it sounds like you've been doing amazing work since we last hung out in college. So congratulations and welcome back.
Thank you.
You know, we want to talk, first of all, for everybody, and Peter and Johnny, I should quiz you, you know, this week was International Nurses Day, was Tuesday, because it celebrates the birthday of what founder of modern day nursing? Peter, do you know the answer? Founder of modern day nursing. Johnny, do you know the answer?
Of course I do. Florence Nightingale.
Okay, good. You learned that in med school. So also in honor of International Nurses Day, Sandy, it's great to have you. I think, and Johnny being focused on cancer, we want to talk about the issues that cancer patients are facing in this COVID world. So let's start with that.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join this panel, first of all, and I hope that I can shed some light on, you know, a somewhat different topic from some of the other interesting things. I'm blown away by what Jay just said. That was amazing, very informative, and I'm looking forward to hearing Rick speak also. We have some small world connections that I'm looking forward to connecting the dots after the fact. So as far as cancer patients go right now, it's obviously a really difficult time for everybody, but going through cancer treatment at this time is, you know, it just really presents a lot of unique challenges. And one of the ones that kind of comes to my mind first is there are a lot of patients who are experiencing delays in their treatments or changes in their treatment schedules, you know, especially when this first started. Fortunately, things are starting to change now, but we had a lot of clients who had, you know, surgeries that were scheduled and had to be postponed because they were converting operating rooms into ICU rooms. And so, or people who were supposed to have surgery and then chemo, and that was flipped around the other way. So again, the good news is that, as John was talking about, hospitals are, you know, going back to the old ways. And so those surgeries and treatments are being rescheduled. And if you have cancer, definitely don't delay care. Cancer care is essential care. So, and also one of the things that I'm seeing is having a lot of impact is the visitor policies. So, you know, no visitors are allowed when our clients are going for chemo treatments or when they're hospitalized. And, you know, it's really hard. You know, we have a lot of young women, it's their first chemo session and they're going alone, or, you know, 6 hours of an infusion there by yourself when they're used to having a loved one with them. Or if they're hospitalized, you know, the good thing is with technology, you know, that's changed things a lot. And so, you know, there are a lot of people FaceTiming from the hospital and, you know, being able to have virtual visits. But also on the home front, you know, when someone's diagnosed with cancer, typically, you know, we all know you surround your friends and your loved ones, you show up all the time with food and with, you know, so meal trains, you know, start, you know, happening, and, you know, friends come over to curl on the couch and watch movies or, you know, give you a massage. And sadly, none of that can happen right now. And so there's a lot of isolation. And, you know, again, there are creative ways to, you know, a friend recently finished her radiation and chemo, and we had a parade, and, you know, as she came home that last day, and, you know, people with signs outside or still, you know, making some deliveries. For our organization, we've actually been delivering care packages to, just this morning, we delivered, I think it was 39 care packages to the doorsteps of our clients. And, you know, they include everything from obviously food, but then more practical things, masks and hand sanitizer and journals and, you know, candles. And today we had a little spring plant there for everybody. So we're trying to do things to let people know that they're not alone in this and they have support. And we're also doing gift cards for meals, because you know, it's obviously challenging to cook when you're, you know, going through cancer treatment. And again, you're not having that meal train show up every other night. And so we're doing gift cards to local restaurants, which is a win-win because it helps the restaurants and then it helps so that they can take the night off from cooking. And then the other thing that I'm noticing is, and this is completely understandable because we're all anxious, but definitely an increase in anxiety, you know, due to those changes in treatments and going alone, but also because of their high risk status. You know, and as the restrictions start to get loosened, first of all, we all know that Westchester, New York City, and Long Island are going to be the last, right? And then of those, then there's the 4 phases, and you know we're dealing with a very high-risk population. So this is a long-term thing, the isolation, and so the anxiety from that is significant. And also, you know, just when they go to the hospital for their treatments, there's a lot of anxiety about exposure, you know, potential exposure. Again, that's getting better, fortunately. And everyone's got proper PPE now. So that's another thing that has changed in the last several weeks for the better.
Could you talk a little bit about, well, 2 things. One thing I thought of was, thank goodness we rolled out all of these ambulatory infusion centers over the last 5 years. You remember, you know, Memorial Sloan Kettering used to be a standalone hospital in the middle of Manhattan. It never really had all these satellites. Same with Northwell, and we've basically put out all of these ambulatory infusion centers in Harrison and all over Long Island, and that's the model now, which I think is terrific for these patients. They can avoid the hospital, the setting. So I think we're very fortunate to have done that over the last 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely.
What are you telling your patients when they go to their infusion centers? What are they wearing? Are they wearing N95 masks? Are you wearing gloves? How PPE'd are they?
Are they? It depends. It depends also how long they're there. So we have, you know, they're all wearing masks, definitely. Oftentimes gloves. They're bringing their own wipes and wiping down every seat. Even though in theory they've been wiped before they get there, they're still making sure to do an extra, you know, cleaning of their own that they have control over. We actually have a student intern who has a 3D printer, and she's made the shields with her 3D printer. So we've been able to, you know, it's, you know, nice to be able to offer those to our clients as well. But it's definitely stressful, you know, every time they go there. And again, the longer they're there, you know, I notice, you know, if you're going for radiation, it's relatively quick, you're in and out. But if you're there for a 6-hour infusion, that's a long time to have that potential exposure.
Sure.
Johnny, you said you did how many surgeries today? Brain tumors?
This week, 8. We did 8.
And I don't know what your average week is, but how are you modeling what the delay of folks going in to get their preventative and diagnostic treatment that didn't happen over the last 3 months? Do you expect some spike?
We are planning for it. As Sandy knows, there's been definitely a delay in mammography, in skin checks for melanoma. We do believe there's going to be a large population of delayed diagnosis cancer cases, and we are preparing for that.
Like you mean like later stage, instead of getting it at stage 1, it's at stage 2.
Yes.
I'm definitely concerned about that. We've seen our numbers go down significantly. And as we know, it's not because cancer cells aren't growing. It's because, to John's point, they're not getting their mammograms, their colonoscopies, pap smears, skin checks. And so, you know, now what I've noticed is that institutions are starting to book patients in June. And so my advice to everybody, if you're supposed to have one of those routine screenings, call, make those appointments, get them in the calendar, because there's going to be such backlog. And it's really, really important. You know, if we talk about a delay of diagnosis, if we're talking about, you know, a handful of weeks with cancer, it's not going to change the prognosis that much in most cases. But if we're talking about a few months, as John can attest to far better than I can, that's a big deal. And my other concern, frankly, is that if we do get this second wave of COVID, that could coincide with these delayed diagnoses. And that's just like a double whammy. And that would really put a strain on the healthcare system. So that's another concern of mine, you know, personally.
Sandy, to follow up on when you were talking about isolation before, obviously cancer patients are going to have to isolate for a lot longer period of time to maybe even when there's a vaccine. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how do they deal with the psychology of maybe middle of next year, before there's a vaccine, that they can be comfortable being outside and living like they did before?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's another concern of mine, is the kind of longer term mental health, issues that are going to result from exactly what you're talking about. And I think, in the short term, it's really, we're focusing on self-care. And I know it sounds so generic, but, making sure that you're really taking care of yourself. You're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. You're exercising as best as we can in this environment. I mean, getting out and walking in an open space and being in nature is just so important. And, eating healthy and making sure that they socialize, because that isolation, is so significant. And so socializing, we're all learning to do it on, on Zoom and FaceTime and everything. And so there's also online support groups. So our organization, we have an online, support group each week. We have meditation and conversations, and we have yoga for cancer. We have 2 yoga for cancer classes each week that are virtual now, because we shifted all of our programs to virtual as soon as we realized, we needed to pivot. And so those are actually, in addition to classes, there are also opportunities for social interaction for our clients, and it's a community. And what we've heard from them is they're so excited to actually put it in the calendar and have something to look forward to, where not only are they going to get a good yoga class, but they're going to see faces and be able to chat with people before or after who are going through similar things. And so I think, our Zoom groups, we have a young survivor group that's key. And the nice thing about the virtual thing is that people can come from all over and join those. Like, we have this young survivor group. We've got someone in Philadelphia,
Right.
someone in Staten Island.
Right.
They have a hard time coming to our office for those groups when they're live. And so it's actually in some ways enabling, there's some silver linings in that.
Silver linings. Sandy, thank you. And thank you for all that amazing work. I think it's an interesting segue to our final guest, talking about live groups and experiences, and community. And with that, I'll transition over to Rick Farman. Welcome, Rick, for the last 15 minutes. We're very happy to have you. By way of introduction, Rick is also a 13-year veteran of Camp Baco and the Adirondacks, so we should close the loop on that. Co-founder of Superfly, Rick Farman, you helped establish Bonnaroo for all of us festival goers, in addition to Outside Lands and Clusterfest. You play a leading role in Superfly today, which is now pivoted into a real experiential business, catering not just to the music festivals, but also to corporate and other events. We're so happy to have you here. You're also an investor in many companies that are about the future of shared experiences. So welcome, Rick. Nice to have you. And let's put you off mute so we can start asking you questions. I think you're still on mute.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go.
How you doing, man? So
Good.
where are you calling in from?
See you guys. It's not Hewlett Neck Road, but pretty cool to be with you both. And I've caught up a bit with you, Danny, over the years, and Peter recently, and Johnny not as much. And so just wanted to say thanks for everything you're doing, man. It's I know you're in the belly of the beast there, dealing with all of this craziness from the healthcare perspective in New York, and it's been so cool to follow what you've been doing, and what an interesting moment, I'm sure, to be doing what you're doing.
Well, thanks, Rick.
And you're calling from Northern Cal?
Yeah, I live in Berkeley. So, it's really nice out here to be sort of away from the density that is certainly there, more so on the East Coast. And, I have a lot of friends and family, even out here through my wife, that are in the healthcare world. And so it's been pretty interesting to sort of just see the contrast from obviously all my friends on the East Coast and, comparatively, but it's obviously, still as significant, as intense, but it does feel like there's a bit of a contrast.
Did I read yesterday, before we hit the festival and music and entertainment scene, did Berkeley announce yesterday that they're opening up all restaurants but outside? Did I read that?
Well, there is legislation in the Berkeley city government to basically close a huge amount of streets to allow restaurants to basically use the street as their seating. It's, I believe, something they're copying from a smaller European country. I can't remember which one. It might have been like Lithuania or something like that, that had sort of, used a similar model and seems to have worked well. Berkeley's an interesting spot for activism. It's a place, obviously, has a long history, and even in a world that I am close to through the work my wife does with a group called the Plastic Pollution Coalition, Berkeley sort of was the first place that had a plastic bag ban and a styrofoam ban, and now a single-use plastic ban. And so, it was cool to read that yesterday too, that they're, thinking progressively on that end as well.
Yeah. So pivoting to the music business, I guess we'll start with that. Obviously, I saw some safety guidelines that were just published from some Event Safety Alliance industry regulations about music festivals. Really, when is Bonnaroo supposed to be each year? And what are your thoughts on the music festival business?
Bonnaroo was originally going to be in June. It was moved to October. Fortunately, I guess you could say, we're not producers of Bonnaroo anymore. We actually recently just sold our remaining portion of it. And so, our first big event would be Outside Lands in August. So we have a little bit more time there. But, I think, everybody's recognizing the reality of large scale gatherings, and that's going to be an extremely difficult thing to be able to do safely in an environment like this. So I think everybody's still sort of taking a little bit of a wait and see approach. There are other things, of course, that are frankly, probably more significantly important, like schools and houses of worship and things like that. And then you get kind of the sports. And I think the large scale music gathering and venue thing is probably going to take a lot of cues from those areas of things.
Hey, Rick, it's Peter. So with respect to those large concert gatherings, even if it's outdoors, is it going to be the case where you're really not going to be able to do it until there's a vaccine? Or is there a way where you can have just less people and sort of stagger them in a gigantic field, for example, and manage it that way?
Yeah, I think it's still too early to tell. And I think, like most of these things, we're going to follow what the science is, what doctors recommend, what public health officials recommend. And I think at this point, although there are some guidelines that are out there, marrying that with the business realities is something that everybody's really figuring out. I will say one positive thing is, like a lot of other, entertainment industries, you are seeing it coming together, the way that the artists and the managers and the agents and the promoters are all talking about how to get to some solutions has been pretty positive for an industry also that tends to have a lot of, typical tensions between those parties. This has been a nice little, sort of coming together in that regard. But I think as I said earlier, I think it's hard to tell right now. It's frankly, we're all just sort of, I think, waiting to see what the science tells us and what we learn. I'm encouraged by some of the outdoor stuff that you guys were talking about earlier. And, I think that the outdoor gathering thing might have a little bit more potential than some of the closed environment stuff, just because of the way it seems that the virus reacts. But I think we're a ways off from figuring out these things. And, it's going to be interesting to see how it develops.
Well, the governor today is opening up New York beaches for Memorial Day, and following in line with New Jersey, which is going to open their beaches for Memorial Day. And frankly, if you can open a beach to beachgoers, I can't understand why you can't open a sleepaway camp or even an outdoor festival. So there is some hypocrisy to some of the policy that is going on. A New Jersey beach is as lawless as just about anything. And so the fact that they're going to be socially distant or, not passing beer cans from one to another, I think is short-sighted. I'm very happy to see it, but I think an outdoor festival is something I can see happening come August with the right approaches. Obviously, may not be at 100% capacity, but can you survive from an economic perspective doing your outdoor concert at 50% capacity?
Hard to tell. And I think a lot of it depends on, the entire, sort of setup of the industry. What are artists capable of doing at lower fees? What are suppliers capable of doing at lower fees? Structurally, for the most part, people who are in my position, you make your money on the last, bunch of tickets, right? We're the last to get paid, essentially. Yeah. And so, those are just all economics that are going to need to get figured out. And it's not that different than, how sports and other, Broadway and other places are going to look at it. Obviously, a live music festival doesn't broadcast quite as well. Although one of the bright spots I think you are seeing is that there, is a lot of very interesting evolution and progressive things happening within, live stream entertainment and virtual entertainment and things like that. And we're involved with some of those things, and it's pretty encouraging to seeing what's going on there. And precisely kind of, what you're talking about there with, something like a beach opening up is why I think you're seeing a pretty big wait and see approach to anything that's happening in the late summer and fall, because those are the kind of things that have to happen and have to probably get, tested a little bit to see whether or not some of these other things can actually happen. The other side to it also is, looking at how people are going to feel about going to things like this. There's a psychology, I think, that's a little different of, hey, I'm going to go to a beach or a public park or something like that, or I'm going to, buy a ticket to a festival and, deal with some of the ingress egress issues that you have when you're trying to, bring 70,000 people in and out of somewhere. We do rely on public transportation as a big part of, our plan here in San Francisco and Golden Gate Park. We do rely on, people, ride sharing and things like that. And so I think there's a bunch of logistics there that are, different that we'll have to get sorted out as we see other things opening up and doing so safely.
Hey, Rick, a big chunk of your new evolution of Superfly is on the corporate events business, the Google sales conferences and the like. Those must be also very much on simmer right now.
Yeah, what we're seeing is two things. One, just people pushing their plans back, right? Something that's in the fall, holding dates in the spring. We haven't seen a lot of straight up cancellations. Like, we're just not doing this anymore. We're not interested in it. And then of course you're seeing, certain clients want to move their events to virtual events. And, that's interesting. And there's a lot of opportunity around those things. In fact, for certain events and certain brands, there's an opportunity to actually reach more people and to scale that offering. I think actually what you'll see coming out of this is more events designed with both of those modalities in mind right off the get-go. And I think you'll see that also even in just, regular, concert entertainment and venue entertainment, is that they'll be more apt to sort of think that they've got to offer an at-home version of what they're doing. Because of course, a certain portion of the audience just isn't going to be able to attend because of, concerns for their safety, potentially older audiences or at-risk people. And then you also have, just the dynamic of less people traveling, right? And so, like, for instance, Outside Lands here in our event is, 30-40% in some years of people who come from out of town. So, that's a pretty big factor. A lot of the bigger corporate things that we do are obviously people coming from lots of different destinations. And so that's going to be a challenge. The other thing we're seeing, we have a part of our business where we do sort of like themed entertainment experiences where, you come for a half hour, 45-minute kind of walkthrough experience. The thing that we most recently launched in that area is a Friends experience that we did in New York and Boston, last year, and was very successful. And what we're seeing in that area of things is a lot of our IP partners, the people who own, the television shows and film shows, they're really interested in that format because it's way easier to make that kind of experience safe and manageable for what we're dealing with here. And so we're actually seeing quite a bit of growth in that part of our business. And that's an interesting development here. It's really accelerating that part of the business.
Very interesting that the location-based entertainment, small format could see growth from this.
I think you'll see a lot of innovative things in that regard. Even certain artists who just can't express their art through a large scale gathering are going to look to, hey, can I do something more in that zone of things? I think it's pretty ripe.
Well, Rick, I think we've become a TikTok nation, and whether you can monetize that, I don't know. But let me ask you one question. We asked Jay Jacobs about getting a permit from the Department of Health. Do a lot of your venues require a permit, and is there a chance that you're not going to get granted permits from the local Department of Health?
Well, yeah, everything does. And to do particular large scale type events of something of that complexity, you're working really closely with lots of different public agencies, police, fire, health department, mayor's offices, city councils. I mean, you're partners with them. So it's not even really an issue of, are you going to get a permit or not? It's really, regular ongoing conversation with those folks about, hey, can this work? And how do we make it work? And it's very collaborative, and so that is, in a lot of ways, they are also, partners economically, right? Outside Lands is a massive economic impact, even just to the Parks Department here, we pay a very sizable fee to them each year to use the park. And so there's a lot of aligned interests there across the board. Of course, everybody's going to put safety first. That's always going to be the most important thing. And, we're all aligned there. And then it gets to, okay, how do you do this right? And how do you do this in a way that makes economic sense? And so it's not an issue of really being concerned of whether you're going to get the permit or not. It goes way deeper than that.
Peter, I don't know if you have one more question. I have one more, and then I think we'll wrap up. Rick, I know you've got offices in New York. I've been to them and are an employer of choice in New York and in San Francisco. How are your employees doing through all of this?
I think it's a challenge more emotionally than it is from a work perspective. I think our workforce is relatively young and relatively flexible in that regard, and relatively familiar with using digital communication. And so it's not ideal for anybody. We have a very social team, and so we've had to do things to facilitate that socialness. We've got like an album club thing that we're doing weekly. We've got, we did a kind of fun dance party thing the other day that actually is sort of something we're doing as a product for our clients, but we tested it out with our crew and everybody had a blast. And so, it's, I think we're a business that we've been in business for 20 years. We've been through a lot of different, machinations, and, the opportunity in some ways to sort of reinvent and experiment, even, for down the line staff, I think in some ways has been one of those silver linings where everybody's like, hey, this isn't, cool to think about a new way of doing business and doing things. And so, I don't think, our concern is so much about that as it is, the amount of rent we're paying for space we're not using right now. That's probably what, at least I'm a little more banging my head against.
Stressed about
right. But yeah, it's an interesting, in a creative business that we're in, these times really do create opportunity. And obviously it's not to, minimize all of the, crazy negative impacts that are happening to people all over the place right now. But it is a good place to put your energy when your business energy, creative energy into thinking about how to evolve and how to innovate during a time like this.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well said. And thank you so much for all your insights, Rick, on the world of experiences, live entertainment, etc. Sandy, thank you for your insights on what cancer patients are going through today. We really appreciate having you. And Jay, for covering the camp situation. And with that, thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we'll see you next week on By the Book. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.